Hello friends, Tony here from TL Yarn Crafts with another fun and free crochet pattern. Now this beauty, this is the Maya striped tank. Back to school preppy vibes meets buttery soft and luxurious yarn in this playful addition to your wardrobe. Fully customizable and beginner friendly, your first Maya striped tank likely will not be your last. Now while crocheting along with me, pull up the free pattern on my blog, tlycblog.com. If you prefer, you can get an ad-free printable version of the pattern for just a few dollars from my shop, tlyarncrafts.com. Links to both resources are in the description. If you're excited to make the Maya striped tank with me today, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel for even more free crochet patterns, product reviews, and tutorials. Now grab your hooks and let's get stitching. To make the original Maya striped tank, I used chainette from Lion Brand's LB collection. It's a beautiful blend of alpaca, wool, and polyamide, which is an acrylic material. It's very gorgeous. It has a chainette construction and it just feels amazing. I'm going to use a different yarn in today's tutorial, but if you have a chance to use chainette for your Maya striped tank, don't pass up that opportunity. This stuff is fantastic. This pattern is available in sizes small through 4XL, and each size uses a different amount of yarn. Reference the original pattern to see how much yarn you need. In addition to the yarn, you're also going to need a 6.5mm crochet hook, a 4.5mm crochet hook, a pair of scissors, a tapestry needle, blocking stitch markers, a tape measure, and steam blocking supplies, but we'll get to that later. Now let's get started. The first thing we'll do is make the bottom ribbing on our tank. So you'll want the smaller of your two crochet hooks. I'm using a different yarn, so I'm also using a different sized hook for you, but in the pattern it says to use a 4.5mm, so that's the one that you'll want to grab for this part of the pattern. We're going to start with a slip knot and place that on our hook and begin with a series of chains. The number of chains you do here is going to depend on what size you're making, so reference the pattern for the number of chains you need. To make your chains, we've got the slip knot on our hook, yarn over from back to front, and pull through the loop. There's one, here's two, 3, and so on until you have the number of chains you need. Once you have the correct number of chains, we're going to find the second chain from our hook. So remember that the loop on our hook does not count as a stitch. So we've got 1, 2 chains here. We're going to single crochet in that second chain from the hook. I'm going to grab just the top loop of that chain, yarn over, pull up the loop, 2 loops on my hook, yarn over, pull through both of those for a single crochet. Into the next stitch, single crochet, into the following stitch, single crochet, and we'll do that all the way down the line. And this is what our first row looks like. Now we're going to chain 1, turn our work, and we want to work in the back loops of our stitches. So if you look at your single crochet stitches here, this is my chain, this is my first single crochet stitch. I've now grabbed both of those loops. We want to grab just the back loop to work our single crochets through the back loop and to create our ribbing. So I started with my chain 1, I'm going to dip down into just the back loop of that first single crochet and complete the single crochet there, grabbing just the back loop of the next stitch in each stitch down the line, and that's how we're going to create our bottom ribbing. Now you might be wondering why we're using a smaller hook for this section of the pattern, and that's a great question. We're using a smaller hook to create a tighter gauge. I wanted to make sure your tank top fits snugly across your tummy, and using a smaller hook helps keep that gauge tight, and then we're going to switch to the larger hook throughout the body of our pattern. So I've worked all the way down my row, making sure I caught the back loop of that final stitch. I'm now going to chain 1, turn, and continue in my single crochet back loop pattern. You'll want to do this to the length that is described in the pattern for your size. And once you finish your ribbing, join me back here and I'll show you how we work along the row ends to create the body of our tank top. Now that I've completed my ribbing, I need to move on and work along the ends of my rows. So I'm going to switch to my larger hook. In this case for me, it's a 5.5, but for you, it's going to be your 6.5mm hook. Insert it back into this live loop. We're going to chain 2. I think I chained 1 already, but I'll back up here and chain 2 with you. And now I'm going to rotate my work to work along the row ends here. Now, if you've never counted ribbing before, here's my recommendation. So we're looking at this valley here as 1 row, and then the peak here is 2 rows. The valley is 3, and the peak here is 4, and so on. So we want to start with our chain 2. We're going to skip the row at the base of our chain, as well as the following row. We're going to place a single crochet in the next row. So when you're working into your row ends, there's no exact place to go. I kind of have a natural hole here. So I'm going to go there. And then we're going to follow that with a chain 1, skip the next row, single crochet in the following. Chain 1, skip a row, single in the next. Chain 1, skip 1, single in the following. And we're going to repeat that all the way down the row, placing a single crochet in the very last row here. So I'm nearly at the end of my row here, and I'm actually going to change color on this stitch. So I worked my single crochet just until I have 2 loops left on the hook. I'm going to grab my B color, which is this nice soft gray here, yarn over and pull through those last 2 loops with that B color. I'm now going to chain 2 and turn my work, leaving my A color attached because I'm going to come back down here and get it. So now we started with our chain 2. We're going to skip the single crochet that's here at the base of the chain, and we're going to single crochet now in this chain 1 space. And we're going to chain 1, single in the next chain space, chain 1, single in the next chain space, and we're going to repeat that all the way down the line, placing our last single crochet in the starting chain 2 space. We're approaching the end of our row, and our last stitch needs to go into this chain 2 space right here. Now we're going to chain 2, turn our work, and continue in our linen stitch pattern all the way down to the other side where we'll change color again. So we started with our chain 2. Remember, we skipped the single crochet here at the base of the chain and single crochet into the chain 1 space. Chain 1, single into the chain 1 space, chain 1, and we'll repeat this all the way down the line. And remember, of course, that the last stitch goes here in the chain 2 space. So just after this single crochet, there's a chain 2 space. We'll slip into there, yarn over and pull up the loop. We now want to drop our gray color and grab our A color. So in my case, it's this pretty red. Trying my best to not let these get tangled, but this is going to end up being our back seam anyway, so it doesn't need to be super duper neat. But I just yarned over and pulled up that loop, and now I'm ready to work with my red color. I'm going to chain 2, turn my work, and again continue in my linen stitch pattern. You'll continue working this pattern until you get to the length that's recommended in the pattern for your size. Just make sure that when it's time to measure your work that you're measuring from the very bottom of this ribbing. You don't want to measure from the start of your linen stitch pattern. You're measuring from here. So for the size small, for example, it says to measure to 13.5 inches. So I would take my tape measure and I'm going to measure in inches from here. Okay, so continue working in your linen stitch pattern. You might notice that your work starts to bow out a little bit. That is normal. That should happen. So if that happens, you're on the right track. If it stays straight up and down nice and neat, that's also fine. If you notice that it starts to kind of curl in here, then you're going to have a little bit of a gauge issue, and I would recommend swapping out to a larger hook for your linen stitch pattern. But continue on until you have the correct length in your fabric, and then join me here and we will work the straps together. Once we've reached the correct length, of course, making sure you measure from the bottom of your ribbing to your working row, we're ready to fasten off our colors. So we want to start by fastening off the color that is no longer in use, and we can leave that one relatively short. Then we want to fasten off the color that we just finished. So I'm going to wrap up this row really quick. And we want to leave a tail long enough to seam up the edge of our work. It says in the pattern to leave about an 18-inch tail, but what I like to do when I'm about to do seams is I lift my working loop up nice and high, and I measure along the seam 3 times with a little bit extra for good measure. That always makes sure I have plenty of yarn for my seam. Then we can fasten off and lift this loop up and out of our work. Now is actually a good time to weave in these remaining ends since we're creating a seam here. Now we want to flip our project with the wrong side facing. So that's going to be easy to find because the wrong side is going to have all these little floats from the yarn that we carried up the side of our work. So I'm going to flip it this way and bring the ends together and bring this around so that I can create my seam. Now it's going to be very important that we only work through the loops here right on the seam. If we go too deep into our fabric, our seam is going to be a lot more obvious. So I'm going to tighten down a little bit so I can show you exactly what I'm doing here. So I'm going to start here at the very top of my work, since my loop is coming out of the very top of the work on the other side. And I'm going to go through just like this. See if we can get a little bit more light here. We'll work with that. Okay. And now we have 2 rows here of our accent color. So I'm going to go now and just grab 1 loop on this side, and I'm going to seam through 1 loop on the other side. Just like that, just to make sure I'm only catching inside loops and making the seam as thin as possible. So now I'm going for the red. And then another set of red. Now I'm going to go for my light gray. And another set of light gray. I'm going to catch this red float and grab that light gray stitch there. So we're going to continue this all the way down the line. Take your time here. It's going to end up making a huge difference because you'll have a nice clean seam once you flip back to the right side of your work. So now the seaming through the body is done, and now I'm going to just flip this around. It's going to make it easier for me to seam up the ribbing here. So I'm going to grab these 2 little red loops of the ribbing, and just like before, I'm going to make sure I'm only hitting the inside loops, or that I'm going to actually do the outside loops of my ribbing, just to make sure that the inside stays nice and neat and that this other color does not come through. Then I'm going to put 1 more stitch right here at the base. I'm going to bring this yarn around because that'll help me create just a small knot here at the base. And then I'm going to weave in this end, working up that same seam. So I'm just grabbing the other tan stitches in the seam here to weave in this end. That'll keep that end hidden from the other side. Just under a few stitches, pull through, and I'm good to go here. And I can flip back out to the right side of my work after I weave in these last couple of tails. So now I've returned to the back seam. You can see it's relatively neat here, looking nice and clean. We're trying our best to maintain that linen stitch pattern here. So we want to start at our back seam and count how many chain 1 spaces we have, because ultimately we're going to take a locking stitch marker and place it in the center chain 1 space. You might think it's easy to eyeball it, but I definitely recommend counting your chain 1 spaces. So I'm going to count mine now. So I just counted and I have 30 chain 1 spaces. So my center chain 1 space is going to be number 15. So I'll find number 15. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And I'm going to mark that with a locking stitch marker. This is the center of the front of my top. And I need to know that because now I need to place my straps, and I want to make sure that my straps are evenly spaced on the front of my work. At this point, we're meant to take our tape measure and we'll measure a distance using this marker as the center of that distance. So for the size small, for example, we're meant to measure 3 inches on both sides of our locking stitch marker. So if I was working with a full size top here, I would place a marker in this chain 1 space and the chain 1 space here at 6 inches because I want these markers that I'm placing now to be 6 inches apart from each other. I'm clearly working with a much smaller one, so I'm instead going to I'm going to use 1 inch as my midpoint, and I'm going to place my locking stitch markers where the 0 inches and the 2 inch mark are. So I'm going to put one here, and I'm going to put one here. So I should be an equal number of chain 1 spaces away from this midpoint. So my midpoint is here, and I've counted over 1, 2 chain spaces. My midpoint is here, and I've counted over 1, 2 chain spaces on that side. So I know that my straps are evenly spaced. I have a couple more markers to place, so I'm going to count out from the markers that I just placed to get the width of my straps. So for the size small, I'm counting out 3 chain 1 spaces. So I'm here, I'm counting out 1, 2, 3 chain 1 spaces. And then I'm going to go to my other marker and count out 1, 2, 3 chain 1 spaces. but you'll want to do the amount that is indicated for your size. So now I have both of my straps marked. That's my center stitch. Now we're ready to join our yarn. We want to maintain our color sequence, so I'm going back to this nice brick red. I'm going to insert my hook into, I'm going to do this strap first, so right into this marker, drop the marker, and then we can yarn over, pull up a loop, and from here we're going to chain 2 and jump right back into our linen stitch pattern. So we're going to skip the chain 1 space we just worked into, skip this single crochet as well, and then single crochet in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single in the next space, chain 1, single in the next space, which is the marked stitch. We can now drop this marker, and we're going to keep working in our linen stitch pattern, changing color every 2 rows until our strap measures the length mentioned in the pattern for your size. So I just chain 2, turn, I'm going to single crochet in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single in that final chain 2 space, and this is the point where I'm going to stop with the brick red and yarn over with my gray, pull up that loop, chain 2, and turn my work, continuing with my linen stitch pattern. And again, we're going to work until the length that it says in the pattern for your size. Join me once you get to that point. I've just made it to the end of this row, and my strap is now long enough, so I'm going to complete that single crochet, lift that loop up and out, and we want to leave a long tail of this final color. We can also fasten off our other color, and we can leave a shorter tail for that one. Lift that loop up and out, and I'm going to go ahead and weave in this end now, as well as the ones there at the base of my strap. Now we can flip to the back of our work, and using our seam as a guide, we can count over our chain 1 spaces to see where we should seam our strap. So I'm going to start my strap here. I'm just going to pop in a hook, so while I thread my tapestry needle, I don't forget where I'm going. Starting with this loop here, I'm going to go right into this chain space and whip stitch my strap to the back. I'm going to go into the next stitch and into the next stitch. I'm going into the next chain space and into the next chain space. Next stitch, next stitch, next chain space, next chain space, and all I have left now is a stitch and a stitch. I'm going to bring that tail over just like I always do to make a little knot, and now I can weave in this end as well. I'm going to go onto the inside of my work and weave it into the back. And now we have one strap done. Fasten off here. We already weaved in our other ends. Look at that. Beautiful. Now we want to do the same exact thing over here. We're going to join in this marked stitch with our brick color, maintaining our color sequence. We're going to work in our linen stitch pattern across to the next marker, chain 2, turn, and work back in the other direction. We want to make sure that our straps are the same length, so count the number of rows you have here, complete that for this side, and then join them on the back, and meet me here when you're done, and we're going to finish up with some single crochet along the openings of our tank top. Alrighty friends, we are in the home stretch. Straps are attached, the body is done. We can drop out this center marker, and now we just need to do some edging around the neck opening here and around the arm opening. So we're going to flip to the back of our work, grab our A color, so in my case it's this brick red, and we're going to grab our larger hook. For the neck opening, we're going to start here at the center back seam. We're going to insert our hook into one of the chain 1 spaces. I see one right here. There we go. Yarn over, pull up the loop, and I'm going to chain 1 and single crochet in this same stitch here. Now I'm going to chain 1 and continue in my linen stitch pattern until I get to my strap. So I'm going to single crochet in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, single crochet in the next chain 1 space. Now I'm ready to work up the side of my strap. I'm going to work 1 single crochet for each row in the pattern. Now, when I'm working on the other side, I want to make sure I catch my floats, which we'll talk about when we get there. But this side has no floats, so I'm just dipping down into the stitch and completing a single crochet. Dip into the stitch, complete the single crochet, into the stitch, complete the single crochet. This is just neatening up the edges to make sure we have a nice clean border around our entire project. Now we've returned to the front of our work. I'm going to single crochet into this chain 1 space, chain 1, single in the next chain 1 space, chain 1, continue in my linen stitch pattern until I get to my next strap. And now I've made it to my next strap. Now you'll notice we are going to work over our floats here. So the floats are the little bits of yarn that are left over from where we carried up our work. So I'm going to single crochet in the end of this row. I have a red float here, and I just want to make sure I'm grabbing that as I insert into that stitch and complete the single crochet. I'm going to grab this float here when I work into this next row end. Grab the float here when I work into this row end. So you can see that after creating those single crochets along the side, all of my floats are caught and I have a nice clean edge on the side of my work. Now I can finish up with my linen stitch pattern along the back until I get to my first stitch. So I'm going to single crochet into this chain 1 space, chain 1, single here and chain 1, single in the next chain 1 space and chain 1. So I've now made it back to my first single crochet. I'm going to fasten off here. And we're going to join with an invisible join. I'm going to thread my tapestry needle. I'm going to skip this first single crochet here and insert my hook under both loops of the next chain. Pull through both of those loops, and then I'm going to slip my tapestry needle through the back loop only of this chain, the last one that we made after that single crochet. And what that does is give us a nice clean edge here, almost imperceptible where that seam is. I'm now going to weave this end in since I'm already here, and I'm going to grab the other one from where I joined as well. Love this little piece. All right, and now we're going to do the same for the arm openings. So I'm going to join here at the base in this chain 1 space here, and for this arm opening, I'm going to join at the base in this chain 1 space right here. So then I'm going to work around just like before. I don't have any floats here, so I'm just working 1 stitch in the end of each row along this side, and then I'm going to jump back into my linen stitch pattern for the underarm here, and then I'll be able to join with my invisible join. Same on the other side. I'm joining here. I'm going to continue in my linen stitch pattern across the way, single crochet in the end of each row end, catching my floats as I go, and then join here. So then join me once you're done with all of that, and we will admire our work together. And voila, our tank top is complete. We do need to block this because even though it looks fantastic right now, it's going to fit even better on you once we soften up some of these fibers and clean up some of these lumps and bumps. So the best way to do that is with a blocking board. You'll probably need several of these interlocked together. And I am going to just lightly pin the straps because that's where I'm going to be focusing my blocking to make sure these straps are the same length and that we don't have any kind of lumps and bumpiness. So I'm just going to put a few pins here, lightly stretching the straps because I want to make sure those are long enough, because if the straps are not flexible for us, it's going to end up lifting up the whole rest of your top when you're wearing it. You might not want it any more cropped than it already is. So don't be afraid to give those straps a little bit of a tug and pin those in place. So I'm currently heating up my steamer, which is right here, but you can use a steam iron for this as well. Just make sure the iron doesn't get too close to the fabric. We don't want it distorting all of your hard work. So now I'm going to turn on my garment steamer. I'm going to pay close attention to all of my edgings here, just to help everything soften up a little bit. Now that everything is nice and damp, we're going to leave this to dry completely before we take the pins out, and then you can try it on. Alrighty friends, my piece is completely dry and I can see as I take the pins out, the fabric is not moving. That means that it blocked into the shape I am looking for, which is exactly what I wanted. I can slip this off the blocking mat and I can already feel how nice that drape is. Now, of course, I'm using a different fiber than you, but any fiber that you block lightly with steam is going to soften up. I am so proud of you. Thanks for sticking with me through that tutorial, and I can't wait to see how your Maya striped tank turns out. You can tag me at TL Yarn Crafts as well as my hashtag TLYC Makers on Instagram to show off your work, and then come and flaunt it a little bit more inside my Facebook group, TLYC Makers. Thanks so much for hanging with me for this tutorial, and I can't wait to see you for the next one.